So, mm, the truth and the depth of the knowing of the being is awake and alive only in this moment here now. It is not an experience that we carry into the world as much as the mind might imagine that it is carrying the experience of some kind of recognition or awakening. We have to be so clear to have the depth of clarity and honesty to see where we are deluded. We have to see through the delusion, and we alone are responsible for recognizing delusion in our own lived experience. Because to see our own delusion is to be able to refine, to be humbled by life, and not caught in the play of karma. The ability to discern, the ability to truly discriminate between what is real and unreal, and to be very clear about where the mind is intellectually thinking that it knows about this as a way of hiding and moving in patterns of protection and defense, and really just engaging and entangling in karma. We have to have such a depth of honesty and clarity, first in the knowing of the being and the recognition of being the being is being utter emptiness. There is no world, there is no story, there's nothing to be seen by, there's nothing to overcome, and any movement that seems to be an empowered movement for the me is delusion. Empowered movement of the me is just another layer of delusion that is moving from protection, right? So we have to have such a depth of clarity, honesty, and clear recognition of what this being is, this oneness. It is empty, completely empty. It is not a better story of the world. It is not a good, happy story of the world for the me. It is that there is no world according to me, that the world of mind consciousness completely collapses into an emptiness of being. And it's this emptiness of being that is freedom. Freedom from the world is freedom from the mind. It's freedom from the illusion of separation. But there can be protections and karmic plays that will invite us back into identification. And this is where it takes greater and greater discernment and an ability to discriminate between what is real and unreal, to not get trapped. Of course, when we get trapped, we will trip ourselves up. The mind can have some kind of imagined idea that it is moving with autonomy, but it's actually moving with protection, right? But of course, where autonomy is not a true autonomy of the self, then that pattern of conditioning, of protection will trip itself up. The karma may just have to play itself out on the surface of life sometimes, and so it can be seen more clearly. And every unfolding offers us a greater possibility of discernment, of discrimination. It is not enough to rest in the mind and even to recognize karma, recognize identification, and then keep moving in it. There has to be the depth of discrimination to not go towards anything that is of the me and the mind, to just not engage as a me, to recognize that it is one thing to be able to come to the being, to find a quietness and a stillness, but to actually live this, it takes enormous courage. It takes everything. Truly, it takes everything to be so deeply humbled into living as the reality. But the knowing of the being holds the recognition that reality is beyond the world. And we have to have the courage to let go of the world as the me is attached to. And that courage is about being the being. It is about resting in the deep silence of the being, to come to a depth of recognition where we truly know as the being that we are living the awakeness in every moment. And we recognize, we can discern when we are in identification, and then we stop and we come back. We rest in the knowing of the being, the emptiness, where there is no story to move in as a me that is empowered or moving in a better way, right? It's about not moving as a me at all, not at all, right? This is where the true discrimination comes in, is in the ability to see the play on the surface of life, but to not touch it, right? To recognize karmic play and not touch it. Because the mind will constantly have an idea that it can conquer. It can conquer the story, that it can be a better me, that it can move in the story in a better way. But the only way that we come to a depth of freedom is by not engaging. There is a maturing, of course, that has to happen in the lived knowing of the being for this possibility. So we could say that we come to the being and we rest in this deep silent knowing of what is true. It is to recognize here as the being that is silent and still, that the felt sense of what you are is just this moment, fresh, awake, and clear. There is no story here. There is no me here. There are no play of opposites here. There is no karma here. There is just a deep resting as the being. The being is aware of the moving, changing elements. And as the being is aware of the moving, changing elements, the aware being can be aware of stories that are moving, happenings, situations, thoughts. Essentially, it's all thoughts. It's all mind consciousness. So the aware being can be aware of that, the moving, changing landscape. And as the aware being, there comes the recognition of an independence, of a complete independence from the moving, changing. As we come to be aware of the independence from the moving, changing, we recognize that as the being, we are not affected or disturbed by the moving, changing. Only when there is identification or going towards a thought does the I thought attach to the mind body, and the sense of me is up and running. So before the first thought, this deep felt sense of simply being, recognizing the freedom in this moment, the freedom of the awake being, the awake field that is infinite and free, open and empty. And this recognition here now, it cannot ever be taken for granted. As soon as it's taken for granted and the mind tramples, oh yes, I know the being, I know the presence, we are back in the ignorance, in the arrogance, we're back in the illusion. And here we will trip over our own feet. Of that we can be sure. We cannot express deeply enough the importance that the being is only ever here now. The profundity of the natural being is this awake moment, this awake moment, this awake moment, here now. There is a naturalness of movement that happens from here, which is the flow of intelligence, the flow of life flowing from the source, creating the appearance. And if there is mind consciousness that the flow of consciousness moves through, it will gather filters and create an appearance. When this is happening, we have to rest as the being that can watch, but not act in the play. Rest, but not act, let's say, as reaction, not act from a place of conditioning, reaction, or protection. Right? It is to be still and watch. Be still and watch. Be still and watch. True movement is not a movement of the me that feels like they're making a good movement. True movement is the natural flow, and the natural flow is not a flow of karma. It is not a flow of protection. It's a flow of grace. It's a flow of reality, where the reflection, what you are seeing, is the shining reality of yourself. And there's no disturbance in that. There's no story in that. There's no resistance or questioning in that. It's a flow of grace and an appearance, but it's empty of interpretation. It's empty of me. It's just the flow of life, the flow of natural intelligence, the flow of grace. What we can be sure of is that if there is any evaluation, interpretation, analyzing, questioning, reflecting, processing, there is a mind involved in all of that. Clarity is absolutely clear. The ability to discern this and to really live this, it takes a lot, because the play is constantly attempting to pull you in. Your own mind consciousness is attempting to pull you into identification. What it takes to not be pulled in is the knowing of the being that reality is more profound than any appearance of the world. Whatever it seems like the world will give you, it's a bargaining that will leave you short. It will leave you empty of yourself. It will leave you in the sense of separation that is not the fullness and love and purity that you are longing for. Any bargaining in the worldly, any attempt to find fulfillment in the worldly will always leave you with a feeling of lack. Of course, the grace of that is that we get tripped up, so we go deeper, so that we go deeper and deeper and deeper to recognize that this world that is created by mind consciousness has nothing for us, nothing for us, nothing, absolutely nada, nothing, has nothing for us. But we will keep pushing that as long as the mind consciousness has a belief or is moving in habitual patterns or is looking to be seen or find fulfillment in the external. As long as there is a moving in on the surface of life in mind consciousness, without discernment, we will just keep tripping ourselves up, moving in the karmic play, moving in the cycle of misery. We have everything that is required to be free of this, everything that is required. And yet sometimes we have to move in the illusion in order to see through it. Sometimes we have to move in the discordant so that we will feel the discordance deeply enough to recognize that we are moving in a protective pattern, even if the mind imagines that it's moving with some kind of autonomy. Autonomy doesn't have any content. You can recognize the ego loves the idea of autonomy. Ego sense loves the idea of being awake and autonomous. Of course it does, because it starts to imagine that it has some kind of superpower, of course, in a subtle way. But all ego patterning is discordant mind consciousness. It's not the being. It's not freedom. It's not pure, true clarity. It's delusion. And this invitation is to come to an extra fine level of discernment. If there is anything playing, it is delusion, it is story. And it is the ability to discern and recognize this as the silent being that is watching that allows us to see it, illuminate it as the bright, shining, radiant light of the true self, and not move, not engage. See it. It is only when we can see, in a way, we see the mind consciousness or we see the karmic play moving to attempt to pull us in. But we see and we collapse that internally, right? The earliest stage of that is that the mind imagines that it sees it and it can somehow work with it externally. Still delusion. We have to collapse it internally by seeing through it, by absolutely seeing through any storyline, anything at all. See through it, collapse it, and then we don't engage with the karmic play, the mind consciousness and the appearance that is being created in a way to try and trap us and test us. Now, this depth of discernment is the ability to know the being that is real and true, know the being that you are, and that it is empty, and not be fooled by your own mind consciousness, thinking that it's got a handle on this, right? Don't try to overcome the world. Don't try to be a great person. Don't try to even be a good person. Just don't try to be a person at all. Just let go of being a person that wants to be seen and valued in any way. Just let go of being a person at all and be yourself. Be yourself. Remember who you are and be yourself. Be the living reality. Recognize that this world appearance has nothing for you. It has nothing but misery and sorrow. And really the question is, how long in the play of time will there be a cycling in the misery and the sorrow of the transient temporary until there is a collapse into a recognition? Let's say the first layer of true discrimination coming in is the ability to recognize that the temporary transient holds nothing, holds no value in freedom. The temporary and transient holds nothing. When will we see through our addiction to get some kind of juice out of the temporary and transient? Another experience, another fix, right? And so with this, the mind can say, well, what would my life be like? Well, how do I live like this? It cannot be spoken. It cannot be told. It can only be known, right? The mind imagines loss. The mind imagines to create fear, to stop the collapse of mind consciousness into cosmic, universal consciousness. But only when consciousness merges into its source, into its universal nature, can it be known what the living of life is in freedom. It cannot be spoken. It cannot be conceptualized or understood. You cannot get the sense of it while you're holding on to the edge to know, well, this is what it's going to be like. And at the same time, what it's like is being spoken all the time. What it's like is being revealed all the time. But the mind will never know this. The mind will never get its comfortable place of holding on to the edge and feeling, okay, now, like I'll keep everything as it is and I'll move into that situation and make myself comfortable. See if I like it. Give it a go, right? I'll kind of give it a go. And I can always come back, I can keep coming back. In a way, that's what we're doing as we're tasting. We're thinking that we're giving it a go. But until we let go of the edge, we don't ever give it a go, let's say. Truly giving it a go is the utter letting go and merging. It's freedom. So we don't really know what freedom is until we are free, right? And simultaneously, the great paradox is that we are free right now. We are absolutely, unquestionably free in the being, in true essence nature. We're completely free, completely whole. But the mind is wanting something. It's wanting to be seen. It's wanting to be heard. It's wanting to be acknowledged. It's wanting to achieve things. It's wanting to know something, be someone. And we cannot really create a situation where that conditioned complex says, okay, then I'll let it all go. It just doesn't work like that. It doesn't work where the mind says, oh, no, now I've let it all go. I'm completely free. This is where the mind gives itself some kinds of delusional ideas. Oh, I'm feeling so empty. I'm really clear. I'm feeling compassion. I'm feeling love. I'm feeling purity. Now I'm moving in freedom. No, 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 no. That still is delusion, right? And this is where a relaxed ego is not clarity, it's not freedom. A relaxed ego is a relaxed ego. It's an ego that somehow got what it wants. It's given itself a little bite of some kind of nourishment. It's been seen, it's been acknowledged. It's told itself a story that it feels comfortable with, and it relaxes and it says, oh, now I'm feeling better. Now I can move in this way. So what we're speaking of is the ability to see our own delusion and how we're constantly creating delusion until we really see through the ways that we identify and create separation. And when karma is playing, we are absolutely like lambs to the slaughter, right? We're constantly being tested deeper and deeper to see whether we will just be still and not play into the habitual patterns, not play into another cycle of delusional me, right? It's being worn down, that we can be sure of. We're being worn down. But hear now the freedom, hear now the being, and hear now the depth where the possibility to open. So the recognition of the being comes with the ability to know in the being that the temporary transient holds no value, that the temporary transient is not where freedom is. And this discrimination, this first layer of true discrimination, comes as a natural opening, or we could even say byproduct of the recognition of the being. This first layer, but we're not home and dry yet. We have the ability to recognize in the knowing of the being, when we are resting in the knowing of the being, we have this ability to recognize the temporary transient is mind consciousness. The temporary transient holds no value. Be still and watch. Be still and watch. We start to discern here that the felt sense of being is completely independent of the temporary transient. We start to recognize it more and more deeply. What we are opening to is coming to a permanent shift where we see through the temporary transient play of the world and being allured and pulled into the temporary transient, being tossed around by the karmic flows. We come to a depth where of recognition, where we open to the mature discrimination, the true viveka, right? We open to recognize the absolute, independent, eternal, infinite nature of the being that is never, ever deluded, never, ever deluded, even when karma comes in, that we have the ability to be still and watch and recognize the karmic play, the flow of life. Because of the collective consciousness, these things continue. We watch it, but we collapse it inside. We collapse it into the being. We recognize, oh, that's a play. Would I be pulled into that? Would I be pulled into the karma? Do I need to act it out? Or can I just collapse it right here now into the silence, into the stillness? Illuminate it. Illuminate the robber that's attempting to rob you of freedom. Illuminate the robber. Shine the light and rest as yourself. Do not move. Do not identify. Do not go towards. Even the subtle idea of, oh, I can move in this way and I'll collapse it in the external. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. That's the delusion. That's the subtlety of delusion. This time I've got it. This time I'm moving. I'm moving in a clear way. This time I'm moving this time, right? It's that deep sense of the mind consciousness of the me, really of the ego's protection that says, I am gonna overcome this. This time I'll show you, world. I'll show you. You'll see me. You'll hear me. You'll recognize me. This time I've got it. This time I'm going to do it right. This time it's going to be okay. Right? Here's the delusion. Here's the mind that thinks that someday it will overcome in the worldly, in the external, someday, right? Yeah, someday over the rainbow, right? Everything that I hope for, all of my fantasies, all of my delusions will come true. This is where the mind lives. Let's call it out. Let's shine the light. Let's love it into submission. Someday, I'm going to have it all. I'm going to be free. I'm going to be that awakened person that I've been wanting to be, right? Give it up to God. Give it up to grace. This truth, it is empty. It is clear. It is transparent. It has no story. We hear in the traditional teachings how the true self is akin to deep sleep. Let this be your marker. This is the lived, direct flow of grace in emptiness. It is life here now, the flow of life, where the felt, lived knowing is exactly the same as deep sleep. Nothing going on. No mind, no body. Yes, there's an appearance, and yet the depth of resting knows only the oneness. So the akin sense of sleep is that in deep sleep, right? Not dreaming sleep. Dreaming sleep is another layer of mind, right? It's another layer of mind processing. Deep sleep, a dreamless sleep, right? Everyone knows this. Deep sleep. There's nothing. There's a sense of contentment, happiness, but not, you see, in a mind's idea of, oh, I'm happy. Oh, I'm happy because, right? It's a deep contentment. It's bliss. It's true bliss. Because there's no mind, no body. There's just a deep resting. This is the self. This is the self. This is the bliss of the self. And what we are speaking of is to consciously know this. We could say in the waking state, to consciously know this true nature. It's not really even in the waking state because it's of its own. It's not akin to any state, really. It's not even truly the same as deep sleep, right? These ideas, the waking, the dream, the deep sleep, these are all layers of consciousness. What happens when consciousness completely collapses and life is just living itself? There's only one, the oneness, God, grace, Brahman, right? Now the glory is that this moment, we are fully equipped. We are fully equipped because we know what it is to sleep, like a deep, peaceful sleep. We know that sense of there's no mind, there's no worries, there's no story, there's no me. That is how this knowing of the self, the collapse of mind consciousness, is akin to deep sleep. And here now in this moment, the felt sense of being, the stillness, the silence, can taste this. Taste this. Taste this. Now the taste of it, the glimpse, is the being itself, knowing itself, being the presence, being here now. The silence, the stop. It's like being asleep, but being awake, right? That's the magic. You're asleep, but you're awake. So you're asleep, but you're awake. And here, wide awake, no story, no me, just bliss, just the bliss of being. Mind consciousness collapsed into universal cosmic consciousness. So we taste it, we taste it. Now let us say in our first taste, it will not go all the way through. We will know the silence. We know that what I am is not the person. What I am is the being. We taste the true nature. We taste deeply enough to collapse the illusion of separation. We collapse the mind consciousness into the cosmic consciousness so fully for an instant that the taste is deep enough that the recognition happens. Wow, great glory, alleluia. The taste deep enough. And now this taste can be a little deep taste, a medium deep taste, a big deep taste, a really, really, really big deep taste, an enormous heaping load deep taste, right? A teeny weeny weeny taste. It takes a complete collapse, an instantaneous, complete collapse, like deep sleep, for the recognition to really be deep enough that we see through the illusion. Just takes one taste of nothing, of true emptiness, one taste of true emptiness, of a complete collapse. Doesn't matter how deep it is. Of course, the deeper, the more grace-filled, but it doesn't matter. But however deep that taste, a deep enough collapse into complete and utter nada, silence. To directly experience yourself as emptiness, to directly experience yourself as being the present being everywhere, to directly experience this moment empty of any thought, not a single itsy wincy, teeny little thought, absolutely devoid of delusion, full, wide open, infinite spaciousness for an instant, collapse. Silence. Now, this moment. We cannot make it happen. In readiness, perfect divine timing, the patterning of mind consciousness collapses to an absolute flat line. Remember, in the deep silent stillness of being, remember, where there are no thought waves, in the silence, in the stillness, remember the being that is silent and still, that you are the being that is silent and still. Remember, in the deep enlivened silence of being, that the innermost being that you are recognizes itself, can only see itself fully and clearly when there is absolutely no movement of mind consciousness. Flatline, nada, emptiness. Deep sleep, wide awake. So wide awake that you see yourself right here in the depths of silent, deep sleep. You wake up to your true nature. You wake up to yourself. Remember self. Remember being. Remember who you are before you took on all of those thoughts and stories. Remember this reality here now in the silence. And the cosmic joke dawns. How could I have believed myself to be the person? How is it possible that I could have been fooled? How is it possible that I could be fooled? Deep sleep, here now, but wide awake to yourself. You are the silence. You are the stillness. You are the simple being that is infinite and free, eternally independent, permanently free. To recognize your permanent independence from the temporary transient, your permanent independence from the world, the mind, to recognize that you are not the person. You are not separate in any way. And hear the silent source, the deep silent source, simply being yourself, aware of yourself, aware of yourself. And this felt sense of being yourself is everywhere. It is awake and alive to its own presence everywhere in the field. So the felt sense of who you are, what you are, is unbounded. You are not in the body or attached in any way to body consciousness. You are not in any way influenced or disturbed by mind consciousness. Mind consciousness collapses. Body consciousness collapses. Witnessing collapses. And you're only aware of being here now, just for this moment. Flatline. Silent. Stop. Stop looking out there. Stop stop and discover what is real and true, the reality that you are, that is permanent, eternal, that's forever. Ever being yourself, silent and still, clear and pure, no story. Now, once there is a taste, you start to recognize the taste, the glimpse of being, that you are the silence. And of course, if this has already been tasted, the taste gets sweeter every time, it gets deeper every time that we point to it. We never, ever, ever get tired of this. It's never old news. That's the mind that says, yeah, I know all about this. Here, as the being, this is never old news. It's ever fresh, ever alive, ever, ever true, ever awake to itself, right here now, wide awake, knowing itself. And if you are wondering about being wide awake, ping, let the eyes open and be fully wide awake while you are resting deep in the being. Ping does not matter. Deep sleep. No me, no mind, no story, no body. Just being. The innermost being knowing itself. Ping, wide awake, wide awake. Knowing the silence of being. Knowing the true self, the true essence nature, the source of all. That mind consciousness, the whole play of the world in a nanosecond collapses, flatlines into the cosmic universal vastness of pure consciousness, pure awareness, and the knowing of what you are, the knowing, the seeing through of the illusion brings an energy flush of tension releasing, vibrant, clear seeing, recognition of reality. Remember this simple, silent vastness. Remember that you have always been here. You have never left yourself. You have always been awake to this fine frequency. Just the attention has wandered and there has been a misunderstanding, and you have identified with the story on the surface of life. But remember, self, who you are in truth. Remember your essence nature. Remember that you may have wandered, but the light of true knowing has always been on and shining bright and luminous, radiant brilliance. The wide open vastness of your true nature, shining here now, fresh, awake. Recognizing the eternal independence from the moving, changing, that you are never ever disturbed here in the being. And so what can happen here is, of course, that the flow of life life itself flowing. The recognition of this is right here in the knowing of the being, but it takes a little flow to be enlivened here, for the dynamic flow of the being to recognize itself. But do not get complacent here. Do not ever, ever let the mind take ownership or think it has got something or seen something or that it knows something. Keep surrendering in every moment, everything back into this moment. Surrender everything into this moment until this flow of perpetual surrender is what life is. Perpetual surrender. This moment, this moment, this moment, this moment lived in truth, this moment lived in truth, this moment lived in utter flowing pure devotion, life living itself in devotion to itself. This moment, this moment. Now, what will happen is that patterns of karma will pull the attention. What will happen is that mind consciousness will start to dance and present possibilities, and identification will happen. Do not be bothered by this. See it, right? So what we're speaking of as the discrimination, the discernment, is the ability to stay here as yourself and watch as life plays. Watch as attention identifies. Watch so vigilantly that as it identifies, of course, there's a recognition of that, and it can you can unhook it smoothly. Right? Do not get entangled in the dynamics. Do not be pulled into the play. Do not be pulled into the play. Do not give yourself up for some kind of shabby little reward on the surface of life, right? Some little shiny experience that the me thinks, oh, maybe in this I'll get seen, I'll get noticed, right? Do not be fooled by the play of the world and the me thinking that it will get what it longs for. We have to come to a depth of such a maturity and illumination that we are awake to the being. We know the transcendent field, but we also come to a maturity where we can illuminate all of the ways that the consciousness plays itself out, that we can illuminate the dance of mind consciousness, what plays as the human psyche, so we can see through it, not by analyzing, evaluating, or getting involved in psychological functioning in any way at all, but that we're constantly illuminating it. In a way, all that's needed is honesty. But it takes a lot to come to a depth of honesty, because honesty is what unveils delusion. A depth of honesty is about constantly watching and unveiling our own illusion, delusory patterns, right? Conditionings, habits. But it's only by illuminating all of this in the lived experience, in the moment and the moment and the moment, it's only by honestly illuminating all of the ways that we distract and not letting the mind say, oh, just this one, one more fix, one more donut, one more coffee, one more dabble in the illusion of separation, one more hit of being seen, one more, right? It's to illuminate all of this, to not deny it, right? But not also to let there be mind consciousness that plays out as shame and guilt and judgment and opinion, right? It's not about that. It's about watching as the compassionate, non-judgmental, open presence of being, that there's a naturalness to this unfolding, that we just watch, we recognize, and we have the ever deepening, maturing into the being, the knowing of what is true, of what is clear, where the freedom is. That this is where, in a way, we could say we want the allegiance to be, with truth, with clarity, with the emptiness. That in a way, our marker is the knowing of the being that is empty. There's no thought, there's no thinking about the movement, there's no action or reaction here. There's just the flow of life. In a way, all life is the same flow of grace, but we want to illuminate where we're being pulled into karma, pulled into the misery, pulled in to more experience. Now, the play of life will play itself out and it will look the same. It's about the perspective of seeing. But the deeper that we go into ourself, the surface appearance will change. Relationships will change. Situations and environments will change. They have to, because they no longer serve. Right? Once they've fulfilled their function, the reason for all discordant play of life is to bring us to freedom. Let it free us. Let us not be deluded by it, trying to win it, trying to win the game of life, trying to be seen and validated and affirmed on the surface. Let us give up all attempts to win the game of life, and let us recognize that if there is any sense of winning, it is freedom. Freedom where there's no one to have won anything, no one to have gained anything. But when you gain yourself, you gain everything. You gain eternal freedom. You gain complete independence and a depth of bliss and knowing of yourself that is a fullness. It's the wholeness. So nothing is lost. The play of life on the surface, it changes, but it changes into the most immaculate, let's say, dream, the divine dream, God's dream, reality, right? God living as God, the oneness. It's not a world anymore that's created out of mind consciousness. Nothing is lost in the knowing of God. Nothing. How can it be? How can there be anything missing in divine wholeness? How is it possible? Everything is included, and you have no idea how life will change. You cannot foretell it or preempt it or imagine it. It's beyond all of that, all of those faculties. It's beyond all possibility, even of what consciousness can conjure up, right? It's a direct living as the divine wholeness, the light of yourself that we are speaking of. And as these words come, you can taste the value of this, that you have the capacity for. Do not be disheartened or looking for more than is your capacity. Be in utter gratitude for the capacity that you have right now, the being, the simplicity, the openness. We speak of what is beyond, even though it cannot be imagined, because the resonance can already be felt, because you already are this. You already are beyond what you imagine yourself to be. You already are in true reality, whole and pure, beyond your conceptual understanding, beyond intellectual understanding. And the resonance right now can feel this. So we are enlivening the resonance of recognition as the silence and the stillness of the silent being, the deep stop of the silent, unmoving being. And as the being recognizes itself in the absolute stop, we're also pointing to the aliveness of the knowing, because the aliveness of the knowing of being is the flow. It's the dynamic flow of the being. Now we will come first to the silent being and the knowing here, and then we open to the flow. We can start to have some value of flow, but until we truly know and we've seen through the illusion, focusing on the flow can actually, the transmission of the flow refines and refines in consciousness, but let our focus be on the silence, on the stillness, on the deep peace, and the sense of the innermost being knowing itself unquestionably. And there's a naturalness here as the innermost being is knowing, to feel the aliveness of the knowing, the aliveness of recognition. And the aliveness is the unquestionable, undoubtable recognition that is beyond mind of the being itself. And in this unquestionable, undoubtable recognition of yourself, deep in the being, hear the aliveness of the flow. And the aliveness of the flow is the dynamic being flowing within itself, flowing to know itself. And this is where the flow of grace flows as the flow of life, flows as everything in appearance. And this flow will flow, and it will pick up the filters of discordance and the laws of nature, and it will create the perfect appearance as a life of grace to keep refining, in a way to keep tripping us up, creating disturbance until we keep meeting that disturbance and resistance and stress to release and purify, transmute, transform. This is the refinement process into a deeper unity, so that we can open all the way to the fullness and the finer frequencies of consciousness, can open to finer and finer frequencies. But the first frequency we want to remember is the deep, silent resonance of being. So here you can start to feel that as the deep, silent being, why would this being move to identify and get tangled in karmic dynamics? Why? The being just rests here still and watches. Just rests here still and watches. There is such a depth of fulfillment here, such a clarity here, that there can be a noticing when there is discordancy in the field, that there's no need to identify or to be seen or known on the surface of life, because the knowing of yourself is the fullness, it's the richness. Don't need to play along with worldly systems to conform with conventionality. We start to live deeper than that. We start to live where the knowing of the being and the knowing of this truth, it cannot conform with conventionality, because it's so rich and full within itself, and it feels painful, and it brings stress when we engage in conditioning and karmic dynamics. So we start to have this ability to discern and discriminate. In the knowledge of the self is a natural ability to discriminate. Discriminate between that which is real and reality and the unreal and the delusion, right? To see where there are patterns of mind playing in protection and defense, and have the honesty and the courage to illuminate and see through our own delusions. We could say, collapse our own projected world appearance into the silence. Collapse the appearance that we are created. We recognize, oh, this is a play. There's dynamics here. No need to engage. And through resting and watching, just a complete collapse. No need to behave in ways that make us fit in or feel like we're doing what pleases other beings, right? We just let go of all of those kind of dynamics, all the relational dynamics that are about compromise, right? All of our needs met structures, all the ways that we learned to maintain connection so that we wouldn't lose love, right? We recognize that we're beyond those dynamics when we're in the being, that we don't need to play out our needs met structures and relational dynamics, that we're willing to see them and let them collapse, whatever the cost. Even if seeming others don't like it, we know that that doesn't matter, that we will not compromise this truth at any cost. We will not feed the delusion and collaborate with the delusion and compromise and give away this knowing of freedom. And of course, we will keep compromising with delusion until we have the maturity and readiness to see through it. It will get eroded, the veils will thin. It's natural. And when we speak of readiness and honesty and maturity, we're not speaking with any sense of hierarchy or better. Only the mind will intercept and put those kind of interpretations on, right? The mind will say, oh, I've got to be more mature. Oh, I've got to be ready, right? The mind, it wants to be the best. But where this is coming from has none of that. It's a natural evolution. It matters not. We trip up, we get pulled in by dynamics. There's no judgment of that. Only the mind, your mind, creates judgment. And it can create guilt and shame and stress. All of that, it's not to be identified with or dabbled in. Just see it, feel it, experience it, so that consciousness can meet it, let it go. The letting go is to let the delusion merge into reality. Let the discordant patterns merge into purity. Let the disturbed and resistant patterns, the protective patterns, merge into the cosmic universal consciousness. Let everything merge into purity. And the way that this happens is through feeling the feelings, the aliveness, and the triggers of the nervous system. Now, when a being does not know how to move in this way and continues to resist when things are trying to open, the nervous system can get very stressed, right? We want there to be fluidity and freedom in the nervous system. But where we try to control and resist and protect as we are opening, the nervous system will get stressed, holding on, right? So we want to allow the releasing to happen allow there to be a letting go, not allowing the mind's ideas and need for structures to compromise the natural flow of releasing and releasing and releasing. That the nervous system is how the transmutation happens. It's the alchemizing vehicle for consciousness to purify into finer and finer frequencies. So we want to allow a smoothness of this, right? It only starts to feel stressful in the body where there's resistance, where there is mind getting involved, control, right? Getting involved. It feels very smooth when we just allow and we feel and we meet and we let the structures collapse. We let all the structures of protection collapse as they are ready to collapse. So hear the silence of being. Hear the silence of being. The only way we come to freedom is in the silence of being, in the deepest truth of who we are, and a willingness to have honesty, open to humility, to be humbled out of egocentric patterning, to have the courage and vigilance. This all naturally comes in as we open to the being and the finer, finer frequencies of the being. If we try to move, let's say that as we open to the fineness of being, when we try to move in denser patterns, it will feel uncomfortable. It will feel uncomfortable. It will feel painful. It will feel stressful to try to move in denser patterns. Can start to notice that when we push ourselves to move and relate in ways when we are living deeper, it starts to feel stressful and unbearable. And in a way, it's the natural way that consciousness pushes itself to a critical mass, to break down patternings that are trying to break down but are being resisted. So when we find that things start to feel uncomfortable and stressful, it's usually because there's some kind of resistance or moving in habitual egocentric patternings that we, in a way, are outgrowing. And it's to recognize that it's never about trying to change the surface of life. What can happen is that we try all of these different ways to fix it. We try to fix it by changing this, changing that, healing this, healing that, but it will never, ever change a pattern that is ready to collapse into truth, right? So it's only ever about coming to the being. It's only ever about coming to the true essence nature, coming to the emptiness, coming to the openness. And here, in a way, we could say we pray in the silence for the flow of grace to illuminate and collapse everything. We could say the true prayer is to come to the silence of being and just rest here, to not really ask for anything, but to rest in such a deep openness that there is a listening. And in the listening, true listening allows a subtle perception of the being. And in that, it opens to finer frequencies where the subtle perception is the recognition that God is here, Divine wholeness is here when we can rest deeply and open without structures, without hanging on to structures of surface ideas and concepts and false knowledge. We open here in the true prayer, true listening. We receive the light of God. We receive true healing here, true transmutation. Healing happens here in the vast open field where there's no one doing anything. It's a depth of surrender where the holding patterns can collapse. The mind consciousness can collapse into the vast open field. And so let us come to the silent being. Let us come to true prayer. And in true prayer, we just come to the openness and the presence where natural healing happens in the silence, in the stillness, in the depth of unconditional being. Everything transmutes. The intelligence takes over. True wisdom takes over. Can we be still, silent, and open enough in our beingness that we can receive God, that we can receive grace, that we can receive healing? A depth of unconditional silence, the deep sanctuary of your own being, remembering the emptiness, the openness, where there's no story, no concepts, no teachings, nothing to know, nothing to hang on to. All projections are collapsed into this moment. A depth of being, a depth of prayer, where there's no one asking for anything. And the depth of silence allows the divine to flow in, grace to flow in, healing to flow in, a depth of alchemizing the denser patterns and frequencies of consciousness so that all discordancy merges into pure consciousness and comes to recognize itself here in the deep silent vastness. That all that is truly required is a depth of knowing yourself, a willingness to be undone, and an honesty to see through all of the delusion, and all of its masks. And this brings us to the recognition that all there is this divine wholeness, this light. And in the clear, illuminated grace, we recognize too that Even illusion is just the divine in concealment. Everything is conspiring for freedom. Everything is conspiring. All of the play of your life is carrying you into yourself. This is the truth. This is the truth. Any effort on the surface is wasted effort. Only in effortlessness is there a flow of grace into itself. Any effort, any trying, any roles, any doing, it's all a movement away from the silent being. Desires, wants, needs, it's all a movement away. Effortlessness, sincerity, being, silence, stillness, attuning to the divine frequency in the presence of now is what brings us inward into the innermost depths, into the divine sanctuary, the deep silent temple of the shining self. The knowing, the clear recognition of the immaculate, clear recognition, the clear tasting of the immaculate, tasting the oneness, the knowing that whatever I am is one with God, is one with the wholeness, with the immaculate, that we discover that purity, innocence is right here. We cannot find purity in the corruption of delusion. Can only find purity right here in the deep silence. We find here the love, the openness, the grace. And this recognition, the remembering, hear the healing, hear the prayer, hear the grace, hear the divine wholeness. Hear. There is a natural unraveling, a natural refinement that happens. Everything that is discordant in this moment is offered at this altar. Everything that is discordant is offered at this altar of now, of divine grace. However it presents on the surface of life, everything is offered. Everything can be surrendered and unwound into the grace of divine wholeness. Mm. A depth of healing, a depth of healing that cures all ills, is to heal the illusion of separation. Heal the illusion of me and mine and my world and my way. Heal the illusion and recognize the immaculate freedom. In this moment, the silence, the stillness of being, the oneness, divine wholeness.